Hello student, this is Dr. Kapil Kapoor from Moradabad Institute of Technology, Moradabad under the aegis of Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam Technical University, Lucknow. I welcome you all to the new lecture. The lecture topic is Bond Value Theorem, which relates to the subject investment analysis and portfolio management. Now, in our previous classes, we have already covered what are the characteristics of bonds and debenture, what are the different features of bond and debentures, and we have also come to know what are the various valuation methods for different types of bonds which are redeemable, non-redeemable, which are deep discount bonds and convertible debentures and bonds. And the valuation helped us to identify whether a particular bond is undervalued or overvalued, so that we can make a correct purchase or sale decision, so that our returns can increase and we can increase our wealth and get a good amount of returns and make correct decision while investing and making a portfolio. Now, in continuance of those lecture, we have come to a very important concept of bond value theorem, and bond value theorem is nothing but the relationship between the bond value and the factors that affect the bond value. Over the years, different economics and thinkers have tried to find out the exact relationship with the factors that affect the bond value, and what are the various factors that affect the bond value. Let's start the discussion. Bond value theorem, the bond value depends on factors, namely the interest rate as well as the coupon rate, years to maturity, yield to maturity or required rate of return. Now, one by one we will be discussing all these factors and we will see how these factors actually affect the value of the bond. First factor is interest rate or the coupon rate. As we know that the bond has a specific feature. If you are a bond holder, you will get a specific percentage of interest on yearly basis. Now, this interest has a great impact on the value of the bond. How this happens in real life, in practical life, I would like to show you. Say suppose as a bond holder, I purchase a bond of face value of 1000 with interest rate of 10%. And the maturity of the bond is 10 years. So, if suppose I hold this bond for 10 years, I will get 10% interest, that is 100 rupees on yearly basis till the maturity. Now, say suppose after 2 or 3 years or 5 years, I require money as a bond holder. You may be in a need of money. You want funds. You want to liquidate your holdings. So what happens? Say suppose say after 5 years, the interest rates in the market for similar kind of bond have come to 20%. Now, after 5 years, the interest rate on similar kind of bond having same features are right now 20%. So, what will happen to the value of my bond that I am holding? Obviously, the value of my bond in the secondary market will decline. Why it will decline? It will decline because the person who after 5 years goes to market will not need to spend 1000 rupees to get these 100, 10%, that is 100 to get 100 as an interest. He just need to spend 500 rupees to get these 100 rupees. So, you can see as the interest rate increases, the bond value decline. It will be the reverse case if suppose the interest rate declines in the maturity period timeline. The bond value, the bond that I am holding of featuring of 10% and having a face value of 1000, my bond value will increase, the value of the bond increase, and I will get a sufficient amount and I will get a capital gain on that also. Now, the second point is that years to maturity. Now, how years to maturity affect the value of the bond? Years to maturity means the duration of the bond. The duration of the bond, say suppose if I say if a bond is of 10 years, so on the timeline you can divide these 10 years like this. Now, as these time to maturity decreases, the value of the bond will also decrease or increase depending how much time it is there for the bond to reach till maturity. So, third important point is yield to maturity or required rate of return. Now, what is yield to maturity or required rate of return? Yield to maturity and required rate of return is the expectation of the bond holder. It is the expectation or the return that is being expected by the bond holder over the maturity period of the bond. So, if suppose in the future, if the expectation of the bond holder start to increase, if that increases, the value of the bond will automatically decline. And suppose the expectation of the bond holder started to decrease, the value of the bond will rise. Now, all these three factors have a significant impact on the value of the bond, and on the basis of these three factors, bond value theorems over the years have evolved. Now, we will be discussing different bond value theorems which have evolved based on involving all these three factors. Let us see the first bond value theorem. The first bond value theorem states that if the market price of the bond increases, the yield would decline. It simply states that if the market price of bond increases, its respective yield will decline, and reverse will be the scene if suppose the market price of the bond decreases, its respective yield will increase. Now, how can we understand this concept, this relationship between the market price of the bond and yield to maturity? Now, see here, we have taken an example, we have bond X, we have bond Y. The face value of the bond is 100 of both the bonds. Coupon rate is the also same, that is the interest rate. Maturity period is also same, 2 years and 2 years. Now, we have taken an assumption that the maturity period is 2 years. Market price, currently these bonds are trading at 90 and this bond is trading at 110. Now, how will these factors impact the yield of the bond? Let us try to see. I will calculate the yield to maturity, which I have already calculated for your convenience. Now, I will show you how these yields are calculated actually. To calculate the yield, we have a very simple formula. To calculate yield, we use this formula. Now, we have several variables in this formula to calculate the yield. What are these variables? I stands for interest, M stands for maturity value, P stands for purchase price, N here means number of years till maturity, or we can simply say the maturity period. Now, if suppose we implement these variables on these formula, let us see what will be the result. Interest that we are getting is 10, maturity value of the bond will be 100. We are taking example of yield to maturity of bond X. The purchase price, the person who is purchasing the bond from the current market is has to pay 90 rupees. The maturity period is 2. Now, if we try to solve this example, we will have these variables with us. The resultant yield to maturity will be 15.79%. That I have already calculated for your convenience. Now, similarly, we can calculate the yield of the bond Y, and which is coming out to be 4.76. Why it is declining? It is simply declining, as we can here clearly see. If a person is purchasing a bond at a market price of 90, he will get 10 rupees. by investing 90. But suppose a person is purchasing the same bond at 110, he will get 10 rupees. So his investment has increased, but the return is he is getting just 10 rupees. That's why in this case bond X is giving a greater yield in comparison to bond Y. Now what relationship we can derive from this? The relationship that we can derive from this is that there is an inverse relationship between the bond price and yield to maturity. This is our theorem 1, that there is an inverse relationship between the bond price and yield to maturity. I hope this is clear to you. Now we will move on to our next slide or next theorem. The next theorem is bond value theorem 2. Bond value theorem 2, if the bond yields remains the same over the life, the discount or premium depends on the maturity. The discount and premium depends on the maturity. It means here the relationship again is between the bond price and the maturity. Now we have taken again a simple example. We have taken two bonds, bond X and bond Y, having same face value, having same coupon rates, and the yield that we have assumed is to be same, 15%. Now we can see here the maturity period for bond X is 2 years and the maturity period for bond is 3 years. Now with the help of the formula that we have just discussed, how to calculate yield or maturity, we can also find out what is the intrinsic or the current market price of the bond. Through that formula I have already calculated for your convenience that if suppose we calculate on these parameters, we have 15% as yield, we have the interest rate of 10, the maturity value of the bond is 100, and we do not know what is the current market price. We can apply this formula here like this and can get the current intrinsic value of the bond. Now I have already calculated through this formula the value of the bond, which is coming out to be 91.31 and it is 87.75. Now you can clearly see the bond X is available at 91.39 and bond Y is available at 87.75. Why is the difference? The difference is wholly based on the difference between the maturity. Here the maturity was only for 2 years, here the maturity was 3 years. Since the duration of the maturity has increased, the discount has also increased. The discount has also increased. It means as the maturity prolongs, the uncertainty elements kicks in and the discounting factor, the value of the bond actually declines more. Now we will be discussing the third theorem. The third theorem is, if the bond yields remains constant over its life, the premium or the discount will decrease at a increasing rate, its life gets shorter. Consider a bond with a face value of rupees 100 and a maturity period of 5 years with a yield of 10% yield to maturity. Now to simplify this example, we have already tabulated this thing in this graph. Now you can clearly see here what is written. Years to maturity, the bond duration was 5 years, the face value of bond is 100 and the discount factor or the required rate of return or the yield is 10%. And the present value, as we know, we can calculate the present value by simply multiplying this face value to this present value factor interest rate, that comes out to 62.10 for the 5th year, 68.3 for 4th year, 75 point for the 3 years and 82.6 for the 2 years and 90 point for the 1 years. Now we can understand this concept on a timeline also. At the starting of the 5th year, the value was 62.1, and the 2nd year it is 68.3, 75.1, 82.6, 90.9, and obviously at the end of the maturity, the face value the bond holder will get 100 rupees. Now you can clearly see the relationship that was being described in the previous slide was that if a bond yield remains constant over its life, the premium or discount will decrease at an increasing rate as its life gets shorter. Now you can clearly see here the discounting rates are declining with the increasing rate. How it is increasing, you can clearly see the differences between these value year on year basis. Here the difference comes out to 6.2, here the difference roughly comes out to 6.8, here the difference roughly comes out to 8.3, here the difference roughly come out to sorry, here the difference come out to 7.5, here 8.3, and here the difference comes out to 9.1. Now you can see the discount is the discount values, the discount at the which the bonds are available are increasing at a decreasing at a increasing rate. You can clearly see it is 6.2, 6.8, 7.5, 8.3 and 9.1. So it established that if suppose the yield of the bond remained constant over the maturity period of the bond life, the bond yield remains constant over its life, the premium or the discount will decrease at an increasing rate as its life gets shorter. Now we move on to our fourth theorem. What does the fourth theorem state? The fourth theorem states that a rise in the bond price for a decline in bond yield is greater than fall in the bond price to rise in the bond yield. What the theorem states that? The theorem simply states that for a rise in the bond price, the consequent decline in the yield is greater than the fall in the bond price to the consequent increase in the bond yield. How can we understand this relationship between the bond price and its yield, and how does the rates affects here? Now we can see here a bond with a face value of 100 with a coupon rate of 10% and a maturity of 5 years. These are the variables given in the question. Now we will take two cases to understand this concept, case 1 and case 2. In case 1, we will try to decrease the yield by 2%, and in case 3 and case 2, we will try to increase the yield by 2%. So in case 1, the yield will decline by 2%, in case 2, the yield will increase by 2%. Now see what will be the impact on the bond price if suppose the yield increase by same percentage, but how will it impact the bond prices to be seen. Let us see it in the next slide. Now case 1, here you can see we have already said that the bond price was face value of 100. And the interest coupon rate given was 10%. Maturity period was 5 years. Now what impact it had on the bond value if suppose we increase or decrease these 10% discount rate. In case 1, we have already said that we will be decreasing the yield by 2%. Now you can see here, this is the interest that the bondholder will get rupees 10 on annual basis till 5 years are completed. Now you can clearly see the discount rate given here for present value annuity factor is 8%. How come 8%? Because the bond had a coupon rate of 10%, we have decreased it by 2%, the yield now becomes 8%, the discount now becomes 8%. Here the 100 rupees is the maturity value that the bondholder would get after the maturity of the bond. Here the interest factor is 8% as we have just discussed, and the maturity period is 5 years. Now you can clearly see if we solve this equation, the value that is coming out is that 39.93, 68.10, but plus if we plus that, the value have come to 108.03. Now the value of the bond has increased. How much? The face value was 100, so it has an impact of rupees 8.03 paisa. Now in the second case, the reverse situation is happening. What reverse situation is happening? Increase in yield by 2%. Now in this case we are increasing the yield of the bond by 2%. We will see what impact it will have on the bond's value. Now see clearly, we will first clear the board. Now we will be discussing case 2. In case 2, the yield is now 12%. Maturity period is same. The bondholder will get 10 rupees as interest. The bond maturity value, the face value will be 10, but we have clearly seen that the discount rate has now risen from 10% plus 2% to 12%. Now if we resolve this equation, the value comes out to be 92.75. 92.75. Now what, how much value the bond value has declined? It has declined by 100 is the face value, 92.75. The bond value comes out, has declined by 7.25. The bond value has declined by 7.25. Now you can clearly see here that in this case the bond value has risen more than there is a decline in the more than the decline in the bond prices, that is 92.75. It means what? Say with the same rate of increase or decrease in the bond value by 2% in respective cases, we have seen the impact. The bond value, if suppose we have decreased the yield by 2%, the bond value has increased much more rate percent than in case if suppose if we increase the bond value by 2%, the bond value has come to 92.75. Now we come to our theorem 4. Bond value theorem 5. Theorem 5 states that the change in the price will be less for a percentage change in the bond's yield if its coupon rate is higher. What does this theorem tries to tell us? This theorem tries to tell us the change in the price will be less. The change in the bond price will be less for a percentage change in the bond's yield. How can we understand this concept here? We will take a simple example for this. We have taken two situations. We have taken bond X and we have taken bond Y. Now see, the coupon rate of these bonds are different. Here the bond X is of 10% coupon rate and here bond Y is of 8% coupon rate. The coupon rate of bond is more than the coupon rate of bond Y. Yield is same. We have kept the yield same. Maturity period is also same, 3 years. Price of the bond. Now see, the current market price that is prevailing of the in the market is 100.15 and 100. Face value of the bond is 100. Now see what will be the impact of increase or decrease in the yield. Say suppose we increase the yield of the bond of both the bond by the same percentage. We are increasing the yield of the bond by same percentage, 1% in both the cases, but what impact it will have on the bond prices? Now we will see the bond prices. In this case the bond X, the bond price comes out to 102.51, but in this case it has come out to 97.47. Now the percentage change in the price in the bond due to same percentage change in the yield, you can clearly see that the percentage change in the bond price is 2.4% as against the percentage change in 2.53% in case of Y. Why this is happening? Because theorem 5 clearly explains us the fact that if your yield is increasing and decreasing, the relative increase and decrease of the bond price will be impacted more on the cases where the rate is coupon rate is less. It means also that if the bond coupon rate is higher, its price will not be affected that much. That's why we can see the bond X, which is having a coupon rate of 10%, is that price of the bond is relatively less affected than the price of the bond which has a coupon rate of 8%. The price of the bond has relatively affected more in comparison to bond X. Now we have seen that there are in all total 5 theorems. Now 5 theorems we can again recall. Theorem 1. What was theorem 1? Theorem 1 was trying to establish a relationship between the bond value, bond price with the yield, and this theorem explains us that there is an inverse relationship between the bond price and yield to maturity, which we have identified in our slide as well. We have seen that if suppose the market price of the bond is different, 90 and 110 in this case, the yield to maturity will obviously be different, as the person is investing less amount in comparison to bond Y, and the yield is coming out to 15.79. In this case, the yield is coming out to be 4.71. The bond 1 theorem establishes the relationship between the bond value and yield to maturity, and also tells us that there is an inverse relationship between the bond price and yield to maturity. What does the bond value theorem 2 states us? Bond value 2 theorem states us it is also relating to the bond price and maturity relationship, but the point is that the bond theorem says if the bond yield remains same over the life, the discount of premiums depends on the maturity. It means there is a significant impact on the bond price to the maturity period of the bond. Different bonds of different maturity periods will be having different prices, and they will be a bond which is having a duration of more maturity will be available on more discounted prices if suppose all other parameters are same. If the coupon rate is same, if the yield to maturity is same, and the face value is same, the bonds which are of a longer duration will be available at much more discounted prices. What does theorem 3 says? If a bond yield remains constant over its life, the premium or the discount will decrease at an increasing rate as its life gets shorter. We have again seen here, I have already given you a timeline for this. We can clearly see here, this is the lifetime of the bond, and as we approach to the maturity of the bond, the face value of the bond at the end of the year is 100, you will get the maturity value of 100. At the starting, it was available at a discounted rate of 62, in the first year 68, 75, 82, 90 as on, and now these values are increases and the discounting values are decreasing as it approaches to maturity. And how it is impacting this approach is being at an increasing rate. Here the difference is 6.2, here the difference is 6.8, the difference is 7.5, and difference is 8.3, and difference is 9.1. So again this holds true that theorem Y state if a bond yield remains constant over its life, the premium or discount will decrease at an increasing rate as its life gets shorter. Now the Theorem 4, what was the Theorem 4 stating us? Theorem 4 was stating us that a relative rise in the price of the bond with the relative increase in the yield will be far greater than bond decline, price decline of the bond with the relative increase in bonds yield. And for this we have taken an assumption, we have taken two cases in which we have tried to decrease and increase the yields of the bond by 2% respectively, and we have seen the impact of those on the bond prices. And how these have impacted on the bond prices, we can clearly see here that in case if the yield is decreased by 2%, the bond value has increased by 108, which means there is a difference of 8.03 to the face value. And in case the yield is increased by 2% and the increase is 2%, the bond value is coming out to be 92.75. And now you can clearly see here the price change in first case when the yield is decreased by 2%, the change in the price was 8.03, and in this case it was 7.25. And last the fifth theorem states us that the price of the bond will be more affected in case of those bonds where the coupon rate is far less than in comparison to bond which have a more coupon rate. So we by now conclude this session about the bond theorem, and we have come to a conclusion that different factors, that are yield to maturity, price, yield to maturity, interest rate and maturity period have a significant impact on the valuation of bond and the prices that they are available in the market. I take your leave. Thank you very much.